Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Advanced Sports Analytics Show presented by RotoGrinders. It's week 6. I'm your host, Travis Mangone, back with the usual crew. We got Stewart, we got Brandon Adams. We'll kick it off with you first, Brandon. How's it going over there? How was your week? How is no Christian McCaffrey?
It was a tough week. It wasn't a complete disaster. I had, it was maybe negative 35% ROI. Which, as you know, is not one of those total disaster weeks. It happens often enough where you're negative 98% ROI in the kind of big field tournaments that I do. So it wasn't a total disaster.
Listen, that's okay when you're living the GPP life. So I totally get it. Don't worry, there's no McCaffrey on the main slate, right? We have him in the London game, so that'll be good for you. Who knows what'll happen? Maybe it'll be worse because maybe he does have the dud game because he gets the Bucks again. But we'll have to see how that all plays out. Over to you, Stewart. How was your week? How'd you feel about the chalk, the GPP life? How did it all go for you?
I didn't do that much GPP. I was mostly cash this week and did well. I mean, I had McCaffrey, didn't have Will Fuller in cash, but it's okay when you get 100 points from McCaffrey and Aaron Jones, and was on the right game for quarterbacks. So yeah, did okay. Week 6 looking to be pretty tough, but I don't know. I'm kind of bummed I'm missing out on the Astros Game 5 right now. It's going to be a good game, and hope to catch the end of it after the show.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to catch that game when we get off the show too. Watch and see how the game goes. But yeah, last week was fun for me. I had Will Fuller, Michael Thomas, and I had Christian McCaffrey in cash. And listen, almost had Aaron Jones. Very close. So it was a good week for me. Can't complain. All around every site had a good one. So looking to rebuild, build off of that and have another good week here. So let's kind of dive in. Let's talk about last week a little bit and talk about the recap. And yeah, I mean, a lot went on, Brandon. There's so much happened. So give us your take on what happened in week 5. Give us a recap.
Well, it was one of those weeks where chalk went off to an extraordinary degree. So you felt great about your raw scores, but they didn't necessarily make a lot of money. I happen to have a ton of Watson and a ton of Atlanta Houston exposure and a decent bit of Fuller exposure. That's why I was able to survive despite having no McCaffrey. I was maybe a bit higher than the field on Aaron Jones, so that was a savior. I had way too much Julio. As we discussed, I loved Julio on the week. And I loved Hopkins and went chalky there, and that was not good. So it was actually quite tough to run a normal game stack on the Houston Atlanta. You kind of just had to nail Watson to Fuller. And yeah, for me, I went a bit too chalky there on the high price receivers. As you know, I was high on them going into the week, and that was tough.
Well, for good reason. I mean, you saw the opportunity was there. Like it was a phenomenal spot for those guys, and they're in phenomenal spots again. And as you can tell, like you saw what Will Fuller could do. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins has that same exact upside. So yeah, I think that's perfectly perfectly fine. I get it. The week will come for you, right, where those big den receivers will get there for you.
Well, we favored lineups that had the top tier wide receivers with some spin down running backs, and the type of construction that we looked at would have had, say, a David Montgomery, Aaron Jones, and that was a great combo. We just didn't get there against some of the other chalky lineups that spent up at running back.
Yeah, Stuart, one thing that you and I, we definitely talked about a lot. I don't remember how much Brandon touched on, but Aaron Jones, I remember you talking about him a ton. I liked him a lot as well. Aaron Jones was a great hit. I'm sure he helped you out a ton last week. What were some other recaps that you had from last week that you really enjoyed?
Yeah, I mean, the Atlanta, I think, last week proved to be one of those weeks where you could be on the right game, and obviously being on the side of, Will Fuller and Watson. I think where there was kind of separation was if you got the Atlanta side right. And I don't know, I tend to run pretty, wide stacks where I'm double stacking on the quarterback side and running backs on the opposite side. And that was, I think, kind of a strategy where you might have gotten into trouble if you were running Fuller and Hopkins, because in a big field tournament, it was kind of that Fuller single stack that was really the hit. And I kind of was leaning towards Julio on the Atlanta side, and I think I had Ridley and Hooper in separate lineups, and like those were kind of the Atlanta guys that maybe worked reasonably well. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's just kind of how it goes. I think when you have a game like that Atlanta Houston game where it was just so clear to me that was the game I wanted to target. You try to sprinkle it around as much as you can. I've been the past couple weeks only doing the 3 entry maxes, and yeah, I mean, it's impossible to get to like all the combinations that you might want to get to cover that game if you're only running 3. But yeah, I mean, Aaron Jones, I was kind of on from the get-go, and I mean, a total blow-up spot. No Devontae Adams, no Jamal Williams, and yeah, I mean, Jones was kind of in this not Eckler type role from a receiving standpoint, but just a guy who's like a really good running back who in the past has been limited by his volume and kind of a split with other running backs. And it was very clear that he was going to be that go-to guy. I mean, obviously 4 touchdowns is the kind of extreme ceiling that he could have hit, but I think it was quite clear that he was going to be such a featured part of the Green Bay running game. And I mean, Matt LaFleur, I think back to his time in Tennessee, is a guy who wants to lean on the run when given the opportunity. So yeah, I mean, I kind of saw that as an easy spot to get to. Yeah, like you said, Michael Thomas, I mean, just so egregiously underpriced, also like hit an outcome ceiling, but still, I mean, I don't think there was really any doubt in my mind that he was going to be in my cash roster. Yeah, and then at quarterback, I mean, I think there were some viable considerations like Carson Wentz, but just given kind of the air yards expectation for that Houston-Atlanta game, it was really between Matt Ryan and Deshaun Watson, and stuck with Ryan so that I could pay up kind of elsewhere. But yeah, I think either of those guys made a ton of sense leading into the weekend, and obviously paid out as kind of we had expected at the end of Sunday.
Yeah, it's all about volume, at least for the running backs for me. I just want the guys that are just getting fed a ton of volume. Guys like Leonard Fournette, Aaron Jones in the spot, David Johnson. Brandon, what do you think of all these volume running backs, and how are you approaching them going forward? Have you adjusted things based on last week, or are you saying, hey, last week's a week the chalk exploded? You're just like, I'm gonna, just keep doing what I'm doing, and just keep humming along.
Yeah, for me, it's keep doing what I'm doing. I think it was just poor outcomes for, say, Julio and Hopkins. Although, if you knew their ownership numbers ahead of time, you have to hesitate, right? There were in the big field contest like 28%, 25%, stuff like that. Also, we had talked about some of the chalky, cheap wide receivers. Those were way too heavily owned. We should have foreseen that and been off of them. Like Auden Tate was 55% in some tournaments. That should have you off of him. And it's worth noting that on weeks where you do have these chalk wide receivers that are 3 to 4K, Stewart and I have done a good bit of work there. And we've talked about how the top tier wide receivers have access to a very unique ceiling. It's also true that the wide receivers price, say, 3,000 to 4,500, even when they're in these great spots, they rarely score above 20, 23 fantasy points. So on a typical week, you're hoping for 20 from like your Auden Tates or your Kiki Kutes. You're hoping for 20 points. And if they get 20 points, then most weeks they're must-haves in your lineup. But on a typical tournament week, if you get the 12, 14-point outcome, you can still win a tournament if you nail all the other spots. But this was not one of those weeks. If you filled a position with one of these guys that scored 12 points, you were dead.
Yeah, it's funny, like you mentioned, going like the cheaper receiver. And kind of one thing I ended up doing is I pivoted off of Tate on one of my GPP teams to Kiki Kute. But you know what happened when I did that? I was playing Matt Ryan in that lineup, and I was running it back with a Texan and 2 Falcons. And so since I got Kute, I lost Will Fuller, who was my guy that I had. So that was kind of frustrating for me. But yeah, I definitely think like I got off of a guy like Tate because I thought the ownership was just too high. And he certainly did get there, right? Like he got there at least from a value perspective and made it work because of the guys around him, right? He got that late touchdown, but he was looking really bad and like a really bad candidate going into like the fourth quarter of that game.
Yeah. Do we agree that Kuche was probably under-owned based on the situation? Like he was owned at 7 to 10%, given his pricing and opportunity set, he probably should have had higher ownership than that. So he was a good play ex ante, a bad play ex post.
Yeah, I think if like if you flipped around the Tate news and the Kike Kute news, I think if you just flipped them completely, the ownerships would have been opposite. Stewart, what do you kind of think of about that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the absence of Kenny Stills opened up some opportunity for Kikute. Yeah, we just saw the Texans use like tight ends more than I think kind of people might have expected, at least more than I had expected, and perhaps that cut into Kute's upside a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's not that Kute didn't get there. I mean, I think he put up like close to 10 fantasy points. Not from a tournament standpoint, that's probably not going to do it for you. But yeah, I don't think it's a bad play at all. I mean, he's shown last year the ability to really go off in good spots where he's a guy that Deshaun Watson's going to look for underneath, and those running backs of Houston just haven't really factored in a big way at all. I mean, Duke Johnson, guy I was really excited for the Texans to get, just hasn't been a part of the Texans offense at all. And yeah, you would think that would benefit Kute as kind of the short yardage receiving option. Didn't work last week, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, if Kenny Stills is out again, I don't think it's unreasonable to try that route again, especially if ownership on Fuller is really high, even at that elevated price tag.
Yeah. Anything else you want to talk about the Week 5 recap, Stewart? Or you want to move on to the chalk not going off and talk about that a little bit, which is kind of similar to what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, same thing. I in kind of what we were talking about with Auden Tate, just kind of want to get y'all's opinion about what is. We have these guys in, like Auden Tate was a guy. I don't think Mixon was really chalk per se, but he actually, I played him in cash and thought he was a pretty viable play. And I kind of underestimated how bad that Cincinnati offense is. And yeah, I don't know. I kind of want to understand how you guys are handling some of these plays that like are seemingly in good spots, but are just a part of a anemic offense. And even as much as we want to play, Auden Tate, Joe Mixon, Tyler Eifert against an Arizona team that's a good, appears to be a good spot for these guys, trying to hamper our expectations. I mean, I think we kind of have a example of it coming up this week where I think, you could go some Miami, Washington guys. Those are perceived to be good matchups for those players. But I don't know. I mean, those offenses have seen, have appeared to be pretty anemic lately. And I don't know, I'm just curious to kind of know how you guys are handling some of these guys in good spots, but are part of clearly bad teams. And if that's somewhere you're willing to go or something you want to stay away from.
Yeah, I think for myself, like with the Cardinals situation, like we played that game because of the pace and the high total. And I think that played in part. And like this Washington Dolphins game doesn't really have that going for it. Like you could totally see each of these teams getting up and just like really running the ball in the fourth quarter and just trying to play conservative. You can see both sides just playing very slow. I think that's one of the reasons why we're really on that Cincinnati game. And one thing to note too about that game is there were a lot of field goals kicked like within like the red zone and like at the goal line. So there's also that played factor in. So yeah, Brandon, what's your kind of take on the Cincinnati situation?
Well, I think, okay, neither Stewart nor I bet games. So one part of the analytics that is a theoretical improvement for us is looking at some intricacies of the betting markets. And I kind of have the philosophy that NFL is a very efficient market, and so we can go by spreads and totals quite carefully. But I do think you get some subtleties. If we take, for instance, the 49ers Browns example from Monday Night Football, that was a game where I sort of looked at it and intuitively wanted to bet the Browns. I didn't bet, but intuitively I wanted to. And I imagine a lot of the public intuitively wanted to. And it was one of these setups where the money kept going to the 49ers and the line kept getting more in the 49ers favor, but the public kept stubbornly hammering the Browns. So the public was thinking like I was, that it looked like a great situation, but the line was going the other way. You had that reverse line movement situation, and the reality was that the 49ers destroyed them and Cleveland looked terrible. So we have these unique situations where you might be able to add some information to the line, as unlikely as that seems. And if you had, I don't know, paid attention to the intricacies of the betting there, maybe you would have been more on the 49ers guys. So I think these are kind of special and hard to define situations. Cleveland is going to be somewhat of an unknown. Cincinnati is much worse than anyone envisioned. That's going to be an unknown. We have the Miami situation where we have spreads that we've really never seen before. And this is untread waters for both fantasy and betting. So I think it's maybe take some punts, but know that you're taking a big gamble in these situations. And for me, let's just say Miami this weekend. I live in Miami. I feel like I know Miami a little bit better than most. I will take some chances on guys like Preston Williams, Balaj as a pure punt, and Drake, because the opportunity costs are relatively slight this week. There's for me, there's not super strong chalk, and I think the value of taking a big punt this week is higher than other weeks.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, looking maybe in some of these thinner offenses towards the cheaper guys where, the cost of a miss isn't as severe. With Auden Tate, like, didn't have a great game, but he was also super cheap. So like he couldn't wreck a cash lineup for you. And like, in a week where maybe not, every chalk plate doesn't go off, like it might not wreck even a tournament lineup. But a guy like Mixon, kind of expensive, where, if he has the game that he did, could kind of ruin some of your lineup. So I don't know, something to keep in mind. I think with those two, the point about pace is good though. I think with Washington and Miami, right? Like you're staying away from those teams on account of the pace as much as anything. So.
Yeah. One thing I also want to note that, like kind of Brandon said, like I was actually on the Niners more so than the Browns. And the reason why I was more on them is like, I really value line, like offensive and defensive line play. Like, I think that's so important. I think that's something we maybe should have looked at in that Cincinnati and Arizona game more. Like, I just think there's so much value in that, at least when you're betting, right? If the line is close and I like a significant difference between like the offensive and defensive line play, like I just want to side with them. Like I know in the fantasy industry, like, and just in general, like we all know like these players like Odell Beckham and all these names, right? They get us excited and they move the lines and everything. But in my opinion, like the quarterback and the line is just so valuable. I'll go to you, Stewart, about this. What do you think, like offensive and defensive line play? Like, do you think we don't really talk about that enough in DFS? Because one thing I want to mention is like Deshaun Watson. Like, I don't like him when he goes up against a really tough defensive line, but the Falcons are not a good defensive line. And so I knew their pressure wouldn't get there with that terrible offensive line in Houston. I knew that he had the opportunity to really hit that ceiling this week.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think it's going to transition well into kind of our next topic where we're talking about, QB pressure. But yeah, I think like you hit on, I mean, quarterback is, I think, that one of the positions that really stands to be impacted by, line, like skill, just kind of imbalances where, yeah, you want to avoid a quarterback who, no matter how good he is or how good his weapons are, if he's got a bad offensive line like Cleveland does, going up against a defensive line that's going to put pressure on the quarterback, that's, potential flight risk there from a just sack standpoint, from an interception standpoint, even like an injury standpoint to some extent. Not that I'm really thinking too much about injury when kind of constructing the lineups. And obviously defense as well. I mean, I think this year to me has been a season where I'm trying to pay more attention to how I'm strategizing with DST for a couple of reasons. I mean, we've seen now a few times, I guess, some DSTs have some really big games. Philadelphia most recently, New England early in the season, and even the Saints I think it was like week 3 or something. And to me, that's where like looking at line play can really have an impact. I mean, I think we want defenses that are going to be able to put pressure on the quarterbacks going up against offensive lines that are willing or that are ceding pressure to their quarterback. So like you said, like Houston feels like more times than not an offense that we can attack at DST. And also feels like Watson's a guy that maybe can't be as trusted going up against a, vaunted pass rush for that reason alone. Seattle and Arizona, I think, are two other teams whose offensive line I kind of like to attack. Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson seem to take sacks at a somewhat high rate. So yeah, definitely something I'm paying attention to for quarterback play and for DST selection.
Yeah, Brandon, anything else you want to mention about, stuff with the chalk and the situations that we kind of saw last week before we move on to our next segment?
No, I think I'm good. I think this week it's worth noting that it is the 10-game slate, which is fundamentally a different animal. And I think the combination of condensed ownership this week and the fact that the marquee tournaments on DraftKings and FanDuel this week are especially top heavy means that we really want to focus our energies in identifying pivots away from the chalk, because the chalk is not going to make you expected value this week.
All righty, Stewart, let's head into our next segment where you want to talk about, defensive pressures and tons of great stuff that I'm excited to learn about. And I'm sure that people are going to love. How about you dive into that topic for us?
Yeah, so earlier this week, I've been working on putting together a projection system for projecting how much pressure a given team, a given defense can put on an offense. And I think that's useful for all the reasons we just talked about, trying to avoid quarterbacks who are susceptible to high pressure. I think my focus is trying to look at it from a DST standpoint. So trying to find defenses that we think can generate a lot of pressure on the quarterbacks. So I put together this neat little application that is featured on the ASA site, and we'll probably run it for free through the weekend, just so you guys can kind of get some familiarity with it and see if it's something you like. So the main tab is pretty straightforward, right? We just have our matchups and the number of quarterback hits that we're projecting for the game. That's going to be based on an algorithm that considers Vegas odds like spread and over under. So I think we tend to see kind of more quarterback pressure in high spread games where kind of the team that's ahead can pin their ears back and really pressure the quarterback without fear of being burned by run plays. Also considers just like offensive tendencies. So is that team a pass heavy or run heavy? Is that coaching staff going to be kind of run pass heavy? And we are also looking at kind of the skill, or I guess the pressure rate generated and pressure rate allowed by offensive lines. So I'm going to pull up this kind of secondary tab, which maybe defines some of the inputs that actually feed into the projection algorithm. And the two columns I guess I want to call out are these net pressure rate allowed and net pressure rate generated over here. So the generated is going to be for a team, their pressure generated on defense, allowed the pressure rate that they allow on offense. And it's kind of based on a algorithm that projects the probability of a quarterback being hit on a given play based on a number of factors, the game script at the time. So if a team on offense is down by a lot, there's kind of an elevated rate or an elevated probability of being hit, the down, yards to go, yard line that they're at, etc. And I think the way it's calculated, this rate is essentially a increase or decrease probability of hit rate that an offensive or defensive line generates or allows relative to the expectation given the current state of each play. So each play, there's like a probability of, anywhere from like 2 to maybe 10% that a quarterback gets hit. And then the play carries out and that defense and that offense, combine to produce a quarterback hit or they don't. And, then we scale it based on the probability that there was going to be a hit. And then if you sum this up kind of over every drop back that a team runs or a drop back that a team defends, we get kind of this average that is the kind of what I've dubbed net pressure rate that an offensive line allows or generates. And I think it could be a useful tool if you want to look at what teams are kind of generating pressure at a high rate. So so far in 2019, Jacksonville is leading the league in terms of pressure generated above expectation, given kind of the games that they're in. Cleveland, I think, is a team who sees a decent amount of pressure. They on the Sunday slate ranked towards the I guess, top of the slate in terms of net pressure rate. Or I'm sorry, they're actually showing that they don't see a ton of pressure, but that could just be, perhaps due to kind of the games that they found themselves in. But I think we know, Cleveland generates a lot of pressure on defense, and games this week, Cleveland's ranked third in terms of pressure rate generated. And that's going to feed into this algorithm that projects how many QB hits that we're going to see, or we might expect to see, given the skill of offensive and defensive lines, Vegas odds, and offensive defensive tendencies. So I think it's a good thing to look at from a DST standpoint. Conventional thought might be to select defenses in terms of their ability to prevent points being scored and prevent kind of negative fantasy outcomes. But we've seen so much fantasy value created on defense through defensive touchdowns and turnovers this year and in previous years that, to me, I really want to key on like what teams can generate the most pressure per fantasy dollar. So I think this will be a useful tool in trying to understand that. So we just rolled this out, I think, yesterday. I've been looking early at some teams that we expect to generate, a decent amount of pressure this week, and maybe comparing it to price. So like Atlanta, to me, is the defense that going up against Arizona, we know Arizona is a team that kind of cedes a lot of sacks, and Atlanta's not the strongest defensive line, but given what I think is a favorable spread in their favor, we could maybe see how Atlanta could be able to pin their ears back and generate more pressure. They're priced way down. One of the cheaper defenses on the slate. The cheapest defense on the slate is New York Jets, and we're not projecting them to generate a ton of pressure against Dallas, but they're not projected at the bottom. So that at $1,500, that's kind of a team that I'm interested in. So I wanted to just kind of show this tool for people who are interested, and also just kick off a discussion about how you guys are handling DST this year. It seems like a position that I think maybe we need to pay a little more attention to than at least I have in previous years. I've kind of been just dumpster diving to find, a cheap defense that I think can generate reasonable pressure. Defense, that's something you guys are paying down for. This week, we're seeing DraftKings really pricing down some of the low-end defenses. Are you guys tempted at all to take that, or stick towards kind of another price tier at defense?
Yeah, I'm definitely tempted to pay down. The Jets are definitely a team that I've looked at. I wish the price would be a little cheaper. I wish DraftKings would be more aggressive with it, but I still think it's certainly in play this week as an option. I'm not really someone that pays for defense too much because I play cash games and I'm all about just getting that higher floor. But I think in GBPs, there's a lot of merit to it, right? Like the Eagles were a great example. When you see a terrible quarterback like a Falk, right? Last week in that spot against the Eagles, I think it made a ton of sense. You see, if the Giants were on the main slate with the Patriots would be a phenomenal tournament option. Brandon, how are you approaching defenses in tournaments this season so far compared to last?
Well, my prediction is that defense might be phased out of the daily fantasy landscape because the sites, they obviously cater to the consumer over the long term, and the sites have to deal with extreme frustration on the part of fantasy players when there's a must-have defense. We've all dealt with that where we play on a tournament slate and we're dead because we have no exposure to a defense that goes off for 25 points. And the sites, I think they might end up phasing out the defense because it is so randomly important for tournament lineups, and you have these sort of must-have defenses. But given that they haven't phased them out yet, I do think it's important to apply some energy to it. I think the methodology of ASA is an opportunity-focused methodology, which is the right way to go. Giving yourself an option to have those 20-point defensive games. And I still think that this is an area where most DFS players are kind of lazy because it is such a noisy position, and they just sort of look at mean projections and go with defenses that have a reasonable mean projection. But that's not ideal for a tournament. You need the guys that have the teams that have the highest probability of getting to those big scores.
Yeah. Any comments on that, Stewart, with Brandon's thought process on that? You want to move on to the picks?
Yeah, so just one question more than anything. I think we do acknowledge that it is a noisy and kind of high variance position. So would that make kind of the optimal approach to be to spread around your defenses, and kind of like I don't know. I tend to keep pretty tight exposure at like quarterback in particular, but defense seems like an opportunity where there is kind of these defenses that really pop off and can potentially eliminate you from a slate if you don't have them. Seems to me like kind of in MME tournament play, you might want to have a pretty wide player pool of defenses. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, you want to have a wide player pool of defenses that have opportunity, that score high on the opportunity metric, and so have some chance of having the 20-point outcome. And you want to just X out those defenses that don't have the upside, because some defenses that don't have upside will still score reasonably in terms of projected fantasy point per dollar. And so other people will have them in the player pool and will play them, but they might be lineup killers.
Yeah, I think the best way maybe to build the defense pool, if you're building like it from an MME route, is really just whatever teams, like kind of what you said, Brandon, like whatever teams you feel like don't have the upside, just cancel them out. And then listen, every week it's different. Like there are weeks where sometimes there's a ton with upside, and there's weeks where there's not a lot. So don't necessarily have a set number every week. Like every week I need 8 defenses in my pool, but just let kind of the slate dictate what's going to happen. Does that sound more kind of what you were explaining, Brandon?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly right. And the only time you would want to deviate from that advice is either by playing the cheapest possible defense on a week, if they're halfway viable, because that will give you access to a corner solution, possibly a lineup construction that's different every other spot, or in a middling field tournament, like say a 3,000 person tournament, play the high priced defenses, because they do often have a high probability of a top 4 type defensive score.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Any final thoughts on that, Stuart? You want to move on to the picks?
No, sounds good. I think kind of your strategy ball is kind of where I'm landing with defense.
All right, let's move on to the quarterbacks. And listen, I think this is a week to maybe pay up at the quarterback position. I don't know. It's a weird week. There's not a lot that I want to pay for right now. And there's a lot of injury news that's still to come that we can obviously discuss and break down, at least in like the running back value range that could be opening up. But I see myself more going to guys at the top, like Mahomes, Jackson, Watson, Wilson certainly in play. I like Murray, Ryan. Jared Goff, I think, is a phenomenal option. I love that Rams-Niners game. What about you, Stuart? We'll kick it off with you. How are you approaching the quarterback? Because I think the approach is to really kind of start spending your money maybe this week at the quarterback position.
Yeah, and it seems like DraftKings has kind of forced you to do that. I mean, in this week, I mean, we have a lot of guys priced over 6, and I feel like earlier this season there were really a handful of guys in kind of that 5-3 or 5-3 to like 5-9 range that were in play, and it's now just like looks pretty thin below 6, and so many of the guys that we would want to consider playing are above 6. I mean, yeah, I like Mahomes a lot all the way at the top. Kansas City in our air yards projection model projects to, I mean, dominate the slate in terms of, total air yards thrown in the game. I think they're like at 377 over Houston is in second at like 340, something like that. So, I mean, I think Mahomes is in just a really strong spot and super viable in cash. And also, even at the high price, I'm willing to pay up for in some tournaments. But yeah, I mean, it's tough because I think, and we'll get to injuries in a bit, but if those injuries don't play out, like I'm having a hard time finding value at the skill positions, which I think you really lends itself towards paying up at quarterback. And I think if you do pay up, it's going to kind of squeeze you at some other position where you're kind of going to have to pay, or you're going to play a guy you maybe don't want to. But yeah, Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and Baltimore are projecting pretty high in our air yards model, and his floor is obviously pretty high given his run ability. Yeah, Watson, Kyler Murray, I like a lot. I think we just saw Deshaun torch Atlanta, and I think he's got kind of that similar floor to Jackson. I mean, his scrambling has ticked up in recent weeks, and yeah, I think he's a super strong play in cash and tournaments as well.
Yeah, what about you, Brandon? What's your kind of approach here with the quarterbacks this week, based on maybe not having some value right now at this current time?
I think you want to pay up for the obvious guys, the guys that are in the great spots, and likely to do well. Exactly as Stewart says, you want to pay up for Lamar, Mahomes, Watson, Ryan, Murray, and then when you're taking some shots to Goff and Prescott. The one cheap guy that you might try is Minshew, because he has natural pairings, and New Orleans has kind of looked a little spotty defensively. And also Fournette will be extreme chalk, so it will give you the option to pivot off Fournette and try for passing game approach. I mean, it's not super likely to work out, but it's a worthy tournament punt. And just to go to quarterback philosophy, I agree with Stewart entirely. This is a week to pay up for quarterback. We sort of wore out the topic last week of how quarterback tends to be the position with the highest projected fantasy points per salary dollar. So it's where you should focus your salary dollars. That is true again this week. It's also a position where, just from a statistics 101 standpoint, you should kind of be playing it safe at quarterback and seeking variance from the other positions like wide receiver, because if you think about the quarterback, it's many observations that's happening over the course of a game. There's many plays, so the likelihood that something totally unexpected happens over the course of those many plays is actually kind of small. The likelihood that a quarterback of lesser talent with lesser talented wide receivers and a worse offensive line and a worse defensive matchup, the likelihood that guy running 50 plays outperforms Mahomes is just really small. So you might as well just let statistics play in your favor, go for more talent, better opportunities, pay the price for it, and then seek your variance from the wide receiver position, where at the mid-range you're talking about 7 targets, and one of them could easily just randomly be 50 yards instead of 10 yards, and you get your variance there.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Let's move on. Anything else at quarterback, Stuart? Do you have a cheap guy you want to mention? Like, I mean, Rosen's down there at 4,500, but I'm not really dabbling in these guys. Anything you want to mention here for the cheap quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to ask you guys about a quarterback that has, dare I say, elite receiving weapons, a very strong offensive line, and, I think a really great matchup from a passing standpoint. Kirk Cousins. I mean, I think at 5'2", Philadelphia has been really tough on the run and very porous against the pass. And I think if the Minnesota coaching staff is smart, they might try to lean a little more pass heavy than they usually do. Is Kirk Cousins do anything for you guys at 5'2", or is just too thin?
Yeah, I will say I saw Cousins. There was a little narrative behind him. He's says when people are talking about him in the media and people are down and gives him an edge, and he says he plays better with an edge. I don't know, whatever you think that's worth. I saw he was talking about that, how he feels slighted by people.
I have the shirt.
Oh, do you? You like that shirt?
I have the shirt. It's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, that is how he was, and we've seen that kind of like the shirt you're talking about. So yeah, 5,200. He's one of those guys I consider. I think Bridgewater, again, he has elite options, so he has the opportunity to. It just depends what you think of that Jaguars defense. Brandon, what about you?
I think they're pretty good.
Yeah, that's the thing. So what are you kind of doing with the cheap quarterbacks, Brandon? Is there anyone that you can really dabble in down here? If you were paying for cheap, who are you going to? And what do you think of Stewart's take on Cousins? I actually like it a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's a worthy punt. You're playing it more for the correlation, just the ease of what the overall lineup construction would look like. You run it back with Thomas, which is a straightforward, or you would have some straightforward lineup constructions. Not Thomas, sorry. You could run it back with Ertz, and I think the correlation that you could embed makes it a worthy option, but I don't really see it, especially if we get some extreme chalk. I haven't really followed the injury news today, but if Gurley's out or something, it will just change the slate where there's just no rationale to do it.
Yeah, I could totally see that. It depends on how it's going to shake up with everything. So, yeah, I got nothing else at quarterback. You guys want to move on to running back and talk about because I think it's a really important position this week.
Let's do it.
All right. So running back, I mean, listen, there's no McCaffrey on this slate, but there's a lot going on here. And I'm really interested, like at the top, we have Ezekiel Elliott, we have Cook, and we have Kamara. Those are three guys that are very elite plays, going to get a ton of volume, but not the sexiest matchups, right? Like Zeke, he's had some issues with his volume that we're not as enticed by. But he's got a great game script and a great team total. You got Dalvin Cook, where the matchup against the Eagles can't be tougher, right? Like the Eagles and running the ball, that's one of the toughest you can find. And then you got a guy like Kamara in Jacksonville. He's already got a questionable mark on him. Running back at the top is tough. So how are you guys how are you kind of leaning with that one, Stewart?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really every bone in my body wants to play Dalvin Cook. Guy just gets elite volume and is also an elite efficiency running back. But yeah, I'm definitely going to have to think hard about, this Philly defense and, if that's going to maybe necessitate moving off of Cook. Elliott, I can't really see myself playing. I mean, like the volume could be there, but we've also seen Dallas get ahead and, big in games and just kind of remove Elliott from the game. And I don't know, I'm just not convinced that even his like efficiency is so great such that like, he can get there on, like a 15 touch game or whatever. You would really need him to get, 4 quarters of a full workload. And I definitely think there's some risk that he doesn't do that as we saw against Miami. Yeah, Kamara seems very, pretty playable. I think the Jacksonville defense is pretty good, but Kamara's volume is right up there with guys like Cook and maybe a tick below McCaffrey or Fournette. So yeah, I don't know. I to me, like if I can talk myself into Dalvin Cook, that might be the guy I'm playing at the high end. But yeah, I don't know. I really got to think about this Philadelphia defense. I could see myself moving away from Cook in cash and maybe just sliding down to some of the more mid-price, just like elite volume running backs.
Yeah, there's some mid-price elite volume running backs there that you can definitely go to that are really good plays. My favorite at the top right now, I think it's Zeke is the guy I'm going to. But again, like, man, things could shake up so much, right? If Kamara's out, then we could have Murray getting a ton of value. If Gurley's out, we could have Malcolm Brown become value, and then we'll be able to spend up for one of these running backs easily. It won't even be difficult to do. Brandon, how are you approaching the top end running backs? Who is your favorite? If we have to play one of these guys, who's your guy? Because mine's Elliott.
Where are we drawing the line there? Well, 7,000 or what? 6,500? I think.
You could. The thing is, we don't know what's going to happen with David Johnson. I was mainly approaching it as like the big three with like Zeke, Cook, and Kamara. You could throw in David Johnson in there if you'd like to, but again, he has a questionable tag that we just don't know what's going to happen, and it's a back, which is really concerning. So I was mainly talking about the big three at the top.
Yeah, I would roll Zeke among the big three.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. What do you think about Dalvin Cook in that really difficult matchup? I mean, we're definitely like team volume. We like guys that get a lot of volume, but like, is that Eagles matchup just too difficult?
I think you should play. I think you should play it either the receivers, maybe 20-25% of your lineups should have some exposure to that game. And if you have exposure to that game, you'll want to tend to be on the Viking side. And you either play Cook or you play the pass catchers. And I think it would be reasonable to do that in like a fifth of your lineups or something. Gotcha. So yeah, I think you can play him despite the tough matchup because, as I alluded to earlier, I think this is really an ownership week more than others because it's a 10-game slate.
And what about this? What about this next range then? Because like I think there's so many guys that you could look at and make cases for, right? Nick Chubb, you can just make case for his volume's great, and he's just a really talented back. And people might not want to play him after watching Monday Night Football and just seeing how bad that offense was. So yeah, I think Nick Chubb is intriguing. David Johnson, if he's in, I'm sure he's going to be a good option. Fournette, he's just a volume guy. You got Mark Ingram. I mean, going against the Bengals, any running back against the Bengals works for me. Aaron Jones, another guy, volume. He's a Sunday night guy, but if you're playing like those Sunday, Monday slates, he could certainly be in play. Again, another volume guy in the same exact range. Le'Veon Bell, make the case for him. Just has seen an insane amount of volume, and now he gets a better quarterback play with Sam Darnold being back.
Gurley, again, if he's going to be into the game, he gets an insane amount of volume. We saw him on over 90% of the snaps last week, which we haven't seen, all season long. So that's a 50 total as well. So how do you kind of handle these guys in like the mid 6K range?
Yeah, I mean, Bell I like a lot. His price is kind of deflated as if Luke Falk was going to be the quarterback. And I think we're expecting Darnold to play. And I think the volume's been there for Lev Bell. And I think where he's been hurting is just an offense that can get him, to the red zone where he can kind of do work and hopefully put up a multi-touchdown game. But I think with Darnold back, that's really just going to improve his situation and kind of outlook. And Fournette, I'm feeling like I'm going to have to. I've kind of, I think, been on the show a bit of a Fournette, fader, but I might really have to start to think seriously about incorporating more Fournette because, the volume is there in a huge way. Definitely, I mean, again, I do have some concerns. Like even last week, I think the Jaguars just ran a ton of plays that I don't think can be like an expected norm for them. But definitely got to think seriously about Fournette, just given the amount of volume he's getting. Also kind of in the Dalvin Cook situation where New Orleans is a pretty tough run defense. But, I think the one saving grace with Fournette and even Cook to an extent is both those guys are pretty effective pass catchers. And I do think Philadelphia for sure can be beat through the air. And New Orleans, I think you want to attack through the air as well. So I do think they have kind of some pass catching equity that make them fairly safe plays.
That is fair. I wasn't really thinking about that equity too much there. I'm with you. I think Fournette and Bell are my 1-2 in this range that I like. Gurley was the other guy I was kind of leaning to. Who's your third guy in this range? But I mean, the Gurley questionable mark is just kind of tough right now.
I mean, I'm going to kind of punt on Gurley just because I don't really know what his health situation is going to be. Chris Carson, I like a decent amount.
He got hit with a Q tag, by the way, like literally like earlier before we got on the show. So who knows if it's a big deal, but that's just worth noting.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is a good spot for him. Cleveland got gashed by, Matt Breida and Freeman just last week. And Pete Carroll and that Seattle team has just a unwavering commitment to Chris Carson that, he's another guy who just has elite volume, and I think we have question marks about his efficiency. But at 6,000, going up against Cleveland with a coaching staff that likes Chris Carson, and if spot a lead, they would love to just pound the ball with their ground game. I think Chris Carson's intriguing at 6.
Alrighty, Brandon, what about you? How are you approaching this range of the 6K-ish range, 7K of just all these volume guys?
They will be very popular, and I will play a lot of them. So I think Fournette, Bell, Chubb, these guys will be exceptionally popular, and I'll play a lot of them. But I do think it is a slate to look for differentiation. Devonta Freeman had a notable game last week. He had the kind of game that we want. It was just running back went off so severely you didn't notice. I think he's an upside guy that I'll have. He'll be low owned again. I'll take my chances on Devonta Freeman. The Washington versus Miami game is very interesting at running back for GPP. There's a narrative that Adrian Peterson will be the guy. The coach has said that he intends to run the ball, and the thinking is that it will be Peterson and a lot of Peterson. I'll have a scattering, but it doesn't strike me as a great tournament play. I might try to go against narrative and just take the 15 to 20 touches of Chris Thompson, hope for 1 or 2 big pass breaks. And then Drake is viable at 4,400. Carson, the questionable tag, it won't deter me if he's playing. I'll play some Carson, and that's about where I am.
Yeah, I'm probably in on Drake the most as like the cheapest running backs. I also like your Freeman call. And again, I think we're right on Freeman. I think things are moving for him. Devontae, that is. What about you, Stewart? How are you approaching these cheaper guys? I think if you force me to pick one before all this value shakes up, I think Drake is the guy that I'm leaning to because I just think he has a ton of upside.
Yeah, I mean, if you force me, like I don't want to be forced to pick one of the cheap running backs, short of Edmonds or Malcolm Brown opening up due to injury. Peterson to me feels kind of like maybe like a Joe Mixon type of last week, where it's just like, yeah, maybe he's in a great spot, but I don't know. I don't even know how old Peterson is, but that's just not a guy I want to be trusting. That Washington offense isn't an offense that I want to have one of my players tied to, and yeah, I don't know. It like we kind of had a similar situation with Wayne Gallman the other week, where it's similarly priced guy, but I just thought that Giants offense was so much more productive than we can expect Washington to be, and yeah, so I don't know. I don't think I want to dip below into this lower range unless we see one of those guys open up due to injury from RB1.
Yeah, it's definitely tough because there's not a lot of guys like that here. I definitely think waiting for that value to shake up is super important. Let's head on over. Let's go talk about the receivers now. And if you look at these receivers at the top, I mean, there's a lot of guys to talk about, right? Julio Jones, Michael Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins, Cooper Kupp, who's just been a monster this season, just getting a ton of volume. Brandon, I'll kick it off with you. Who are the high-end receivers you're looking at?
Well, DeAndre Hopkins, we're just waiting, right? KC has allowed a lot of points, and he was drafted top 3 in season long, often number 1. His health is good. His quarterback is great. The opportunity is there this week. So let's just chalk it up to noise in the early goings and play some Hopkins. I will be doing a lot of that. There's natural run back. You play those Hopkins, Watkins lineups, which will be popular. I'll be there a lot. My fades, fade Odell, just based on the eyeball test. I will not be able to get away from that. And I just can't, I can't have much Odell, can't have much Fitz, because I think he has a high probability of a middling outcome, but to me, unlikely to be on the tournament winning slate. Fade Landry for the same reason, high probability of a middling outcome. Thielen is a great play. He'll be popular. Boyd is a good tournament distribution. Could be a big play guy. I like him. I think Amari Cooper is a strong play. Then you have a lot of great punts this week. I think Jacksonville is sort of interesting on punts. I think you could play Westbrook. You've got Westbrook is one guy who's going to have very low ownership because his expectation is low. But he's a guy that has a very strong probability of getting to 25, 30 DraftKings points relative to other guys in his price range. And because Fournette's going to be so popular, it's worthy as a tournament strategy to fade Fournette and go with the passing game. Westbrook has that upside. To me, it's really likely to be Westbrook. DJ Shark will have Lattimore, and Lattimore has there was an early season fashion to say that he was bad, but I think he's good. I think you're better off going with the long data in that case. So I think Westbrook is a solid play with good upside.
Yeah, I love that Westbrook call. I think he's going to be a phenomenal low-owned play. I'm already on him, and I'm definitely going to get some exposure to him. Stewart, how about you? How are you approaching these receivers this week? Because there's a lot to like this week.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about wanting to pay up at quarterback and wanting to pay middle up at running back. So I think there's going to be a position where I'm going to have to pay down at. And right now it's feeling like receiver is that position. I like Hopkins a lot. But then beyond that, like Thielen, I think, is in a good spot. Cooper, Kupp, and Amari are in good spots, but like not just total smash spots where I'm, willing to take risks at other positions to get to them. So I'm guessing I'm probably going to only pay up for like one receiver. looking at Hopkins, and if Tyreek Hill plays, I think he's interesting, but both those guys, Hopkins and Hill, are on two teams that were projected to throw a ton of air yards, and I like to get their fair share of looks. But yeah, I see myself probably sticking to the middle or even low tiers with receivers. Let's see. I like what you guys are talking about with Jacksonville. Shark and Westbrook, I think, are two compelling plays, and I just think figuring out the right one there is going to be pretty important. Probably want to dig in more and try to reach a consensus on what I want to do there. And I don't know. I actually kind of like Jarvis Landry. I think his target share and air yard share is trending in the right direction. I think we posted on our Twitter account some visuals just comparing the volume of Landry to David Njoku and suggesting that there's pretty high negative correlation there. I think it makes sense. I mean, Landry, you ideally want to operate out of the slot and kind of in short to middle routes, and with Njoku gone, it really, I think, opens up some space for Landry there. So I'm actually intrigued by Landry a little bit. But yeah, Odell as well, kind of fading. I think his volume is trending in the wrong direction. So yeah, I think I'll probably take some looks at the mid, and maybe one mid-tier guy, one high price guy, but definitely gonna try to do more of my work in the sub 5 range at receiver, I think, just given how I want to be playing some of the other positions.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also like one guy in the mid-range, I guess you could call it, Robert Woods, right? 5,600. That was with Brandon Cooks going to be out, but I still think there's still opportunity there for him. And with him having a questionable tag, they say he's going to play, but with a concussion, they might ease off him a little bit. So I think there's some opportunity there for him in that big 50.5 total. Like Calvin Ridley, too, at 5,700. I think he's a really good option there against Arizona that you could go to. Anything else you want to bring up with the cheap receivers, Brandon? You want to move on to the tight ends?
I think we could move on. It's just worth saying that it's a week where you will get possibly lots of benefit by playing these low ownership guys that have poor equity, guys that have known upside. Just your Cortland Suttons, Robbie Anderson guys that have known upside, one play upside. They have low equity, but since the rest of your lineup is going to look so similar to everyone else's, it's worthwhile looking for deviation in those spots.
Certainly. Let's head on over to tight end. And when I first opened up tight end on the slate, the first thing that popped out to me was Kittle, right? 5,200. I expect him to be the chalk in that 50.5 total. He's the number one option there in San Francisco. I think he's the best play of the slate at the tight end position. We'll head to you, Stewart. How are you approaching tight end this week?
Yeah, I'm with you. And it seems like a pretty narrow position this week, which again is going to make me, I think, want to pay down at receiver. But yeah, Kittle, 5.2 is a bit low for him. The San Francisco receivers, wide receivers specifically, are a bit of a guessing game, but Kittle appears to be kind of the one constant, and his production has been down a little bit, but the peripherals are there as far as red zone target share, air yard share, his catch rate, and it's all there. So yeah, I love Kittle at 5.2. And then I think there's also intriguing guys around him. Hooper has, I think, been a completely different player this year and is really soaking up a lot of Atlanta's looks, maybe to the detriment of a guy like Julio Jones. And we talked a little bit about some interest in some of the Minnesota guys, particularly receivers. So Ertz is, I think, probably lower equity from a per dollar standpoint. But if so many people are going to be condensed on Kittle, I think Ertz is just a natural pivot off of him for only 200 more.
Yeah. How about you, Brandon? You talk about the chalk is going to be condensed. Listen, it's going to be condensed on Kittle. So are you just going X amount of your player pool, or how are you approaching him here?
Well, I think Kittle, Andrews, and Kelsey should be deserved chalk. So you should be having a lot of exposure to those guys. You could mix in some Ertz. The one guy that I'll be playing a lot more than the field is Jared Cook. the price tag is very appealing, and I feel like Bridgewater, in week 4, he was very, very conservative and just dishing little 3-yard passes. And then in week 5, he was passing down the field more. So he's not passing down enough, and he's not good enough to target as a quarterback in week 6. But I think all of a sudden they're viable in every position. And I think maybe sights are low on Jared Cook, and the benefits of him going off as a 3,400 player are huge.
Yeah, no, I could certainly see that. The guy I like the most is like the cheap option. People are talking about OJ Howard. I'm not biting on that yet. It's Gerald Everett in that Niners game. That's the guy that I like the most at the 3,600 range. Who are some of the guys you're liking, Stuart, for cheaper at tight end?
Yeah, I'm intrigued by Everett, and especially if Cooks is out. I could see Los Angeles going a little more tight end heavy sets, and he's gotten some good looks from Jared Goff so far this year. So definitely one of the guys I'm going to be looking at if I'm spending down at tight end.
All righty. Before we kind of get on out of here, let's talk about defenses. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Let's pick some defenses that we like. So, Brandon, who are the high upside defenses this week that you think can take down the tournament?
Well, I think Jets are so ideal from a tournament construction standpoint that you might want to go there with a lot of lineups. Of course, you'd be less inclined to go if some of the cheap running backs become heavy chalk if Gurley's out. But I think the cheap options, Falcons, Jets, very good options. Washington, you have to take some chances on just in case Miami is ultra terrible. And living in Miami, I can say that the level of hope is very, very low at the moment. I think you could take some KC defense just on opportunity set. And yeah, I don't think it's a huge standout week. I think maybe it's one of those weeks you pointed out where there are 5 or 6 viable defenses taking into account pricing on an opportunity set, and you should just go with those.
What about you, Stuart? Any defenses sticking out to you? You talked about it a little bit earlier, but I guess rattle them off again. Who are some of the defenses that you think could be really valuable this week?
Yeah, so actually our most recent Twitter post, I just actually highlighted some defenses that are kind of topping our projection system in terms of a projected QB hits per $1,000. And sure enough, leading the way, the Jets, at 3.8 QB hits per $1,000. At 1.5, like it's pretty easy to get there. And I think they actually project in kind of a middling capacity. And historically, like the Jets have been, I think, a perfectly decent defense, and with the ability to produce some defensive touchdowns. So at 1.5, that's kind of one I want to be on. Atlanta at 2.3 is projecting to have our second most QB hits on the slate. And I think that makes sense. Arizona offensive line has been quite weak, and Kyler Murray's scrambling tendency, he's going to get loose on some, but he's also going to, take some sacks when he can't escape. So definitely intrigued by Atlanta. We also talked about Houston's kind of ineffectiveness in the offensive line. And I think we know KC plays much better defensively at home, and they can jump ahead early against Houston. I see some good opportunities for Kansas City to apply pressure to a Houston offense that really has struggled to prevent pressure in the past. Those are kind of 3 or 4 teams that I'm looking at defensively. We spent the show talking about how we want to pay up at some of the offensive positions. So definitely think I'm going to be spending down at defense, maybe all the way down at New York.
Alrighty, we got to get on out of here, guys. Thanks a lot for joining us here on the Advanced Sports Analytics Show. Really enjoyed doing the show with you guys. Once again, we'll be back next week. For me, Travis Mangone, Stewart, and Brandon Adams, we are out of here.